The aim of this video is to illustrate that what might look on the face of it like a roof leak isn't necessarily a roof leak. This house was built in 1970, and I'm referring to the first pair of first floor windows on the left hand side, not the pair on the right hand side. That's all a modern extension, so you can forget about that for the purposes of this exercise. It has an interlocking concrete tile roof covering, which is in fairly good condition, or even just good condition. Let's see if we can get it a bit closer to that. Does that help illustrate the situation? Nothing wrong there really. And if we wander up to the house, we can see that it is ventilated. There are the soffits, and there's a series of vents through there, so it looks like it's a properly ventilated roof. And if we were to go around the back of the house, I really couldn't be bothered at the moment, but there are a pair of tile vents in the rear roof slope as well. This is the inside of that roof space, and what we are confronted with here is a material called cozy felt, which is a very 1970s thing. I mean, this house was built with what was known as a warm roof, with the idea that this cozy felt was going to insulate the whole house, including the roof space. It's basically a traditional underlay, felt underlay, with a rather miserly layer of fiberglass insulation glued inside it. And the idea that that was going to provide any insulation is kind of laughable, really. But what we can see, well, I can see it with my bare eyes, but hopefully just about there, hang on, just about there, we've got droplets of water formed on the underside of the roof slope. And if you look over here, it's very black, which kind of suggests there's been a lot of moisture up here for a while, which is encouraging this sort of mould growth on the insulation. And well, does that help? There's a bit more moisture at the joint there. Well, what's going on? What I was about to suggest is that this was just a problem with condensation. But I might be barking up the wrong tree, because the other possible explanation is that there's normal wind-blown rain penetration under the tiles. The felt underlay is knackered in a manner which you can't see because of the insulation glued to it, and therefore there's a sort of build-up of moisture inside the insulation, which is slowly dripping into the roof space. Now, this is quite interesting. What we have here is a collection of Alfred Meekin china. Now, older people will be very familiar with this, because this was retailed by Woolworth back in the 1960s and 70s and maybe the 1980s, and it was one of the most common china, is that the right expression? Anyway, it was mass produced and loads of people had it, very, very common. But here it's full of gooey, sticky, orange coloured water which has dripped out of the roof. And if it's all sitting in the china there, then presumably this insulation is full of it. We did already discuss that the property is ventilated through the soffits, which are over there, and there's a suspicion that those have all been blocked up with ventilation in some kind of effort to keep the roof space warm. So what ventilation there was provided probably, or potentially, isn't doing anything anyway. There's another drop of water over there. Somewhere around here though, there's one of those two vents in the rear roof slope, which is doing sterling work. Nice fat spider underneath. Where is he? Oh, he's not very happy, is he? Invading his privacy. but it is very wet. Look at all that. Where is it? Water everywhere. It's a bit of a disaster, this is. Okay, let's go and have a look downstairs and see what's going on in the house below. This is the ceiling beneath the roof space. So first floor ceiling, and we're pretty much underneath the roof ridge right now, and there are a few suspicious looking brown smudges on the ceiling. Here we are back at the front of the house, and there's one of those vents in the soffits, and then just come inside the house and we are confronted with brown stains on the ceiling, more or less in a line across the front of this room. Lots of it. So I think what's happening is the moisture that is accumulating on the undersides of the underlay and soaked into the cosy felt is migrating downwards, obviously with the help of gravity, to the bottom of the roof pitches, where it's meeting the insulation on the ceilings and just soaking through. So that begs the question, is it just condensation, or is there some wind-blown rain penetration getting under the tile covering? And now I'm just looking across the road at the houses on the other side of the street, and we can see that the one on the extreme left has presumably been suffering from the same problems, and they've gone for the nuclear option and re-roofed new tiles as well, which seems to be a little bit over the top. But I think the solution to the problem we've got will be to take the tile covering off, fit a new air permeable underlay, at which time a dry ridge can go on the top, which will be ventilated, and insulation can be properly withdrawn from the eaves, and then there'll be a nice through flow of air from the eaves up to the roof ridge through the middle of the roof. And of course the air permeable underlay will top up the ventilation generally. Re-roofing is in progress. Let's go and have a look at the cosy felt, which I think has been stripped off in its entirety. There it is. And let's have a look. It's got a bit more, well, I was about to say it's got more resistance in it than I was expecting, but not a great deal. It's not going to take much yanking about by the wind to tear this stuff apart. No strength in it at all, actually, in places. And there you can see a sort of lattice of string, so it's obviously vegetable base, so if that stuff starts rotting it's going to lose its strength, and the depth of the insulation that it provides is what's that, 20 millimeters possibly. So strange stuff. A decent underfelt which has come to the end of its life, a completely pointless layer of insulation attached to it. In this bag here we've got the remains of an asbestos cement undercloak to the verge. Probably asbestos. Doesn't look very asbestosy, but it probably is. Indeed, it's quite possible that this stuff includes asbestos too. And this is a heap of battens, and I don't know where they've come from specifically, of course, but this one's quite rotten, so what we might have started to see in a not too distant future is individual tiles slipping off the roof. This is the re-roofed house. I'm standing on the scaffold in case that's not obvious, and the roofer has used a dry ridge system. He's fairly determined that he should do that. All this wet cement business is very old-fashioned, but this is supposed to include a sort of ventilation system under the ridge tiles, which is basically just a very soft piece of material which is corrugated so that you can get a bit of breeze under the ridge. However, I can't really see much evidence of it, only at that extreme end. I mind to don't fall off. So that's as close in as I can get. So those three tiles at the ridge end, you can see some sort of crenellation underneath. So breezes ought to be able to get under there, and also breezes that are going in at the soffits should flow through the roof and be able to come out the top. So it should be ventilated. That's the theory. This is the eaves, and in here we've got a rigid plastic eaves tray, so the underlay ought to be dressed over the top of that, so any rainwater that gets under the tiles will run across the top of the underlay onto the top of that eaves tray and then spill into the gutter. And on the verge of the roof he's removed an old asbestos cement undercloak, so there'd have been mortar packed between the tiles and the undercloak, and used these plastic verge covers, and you can just about see brass screws fixing them into position. I mean, it looks a little bit raggedy to me. There's a touch of square pegs into round holes going on, so I think I'll prefer an old traditional undercloak to the verge rather than that, but there you go, that's what he wanted to do. A little bit of collateral damage. I'm fairly sure there weren't any broken tiles in the first place, but there are, well, 3 now. Not the end of the world, I don't suppose. And this is the finished product. So a material called roof shield's been used. It's an air permeable underlay. It's not particularly baggy. I mean, a little bit of looseness is quite good to let a bit of air pass under the material itself. We can just about see into the eaves. There's a little bit of eave space ventilation. The roofer has evidently put a bit of bracing in as well, a bit of wind bracing over the hangers. Those aren't hangers, those are struts over the hangers, both sides. So yeah, things should have improved. Made a frightful mess in the meantime, but what was to be expected. And this is the roof shield. Allegedly 3 layers of material. You've got to get the green side outside and the white side inside, otherwise it doesn't work. So if you go into a roof and you've got green side down, then the roof has got it badly wrong. Back onto my favourite subject. This is a 1986 built house, and there's plenty of condensation on the underside of the felt. Here's the irony though. Irony. There is down there plenty of eaves ventilation. Looks like the top edges of the rafters are a bit wet as well. Are they wet? Or is that some kind of staining? I think they're wet. If I had a free hand, I'd give them a little rub, which I will do as soon as I switch this off. Yes, they are wet.